Extinction, the moment in which there are no living members of a species left. And unfortunately, even Pokemon aren't safe from this harsh reality. Lapras, who nearly went extinct before their numbers rose thanks to protection during the Sun and Moon era. East Sea Shellos, whose numbers continue to decline to this day. Mudbray, who were hunted to extinction in nearly every region except Alola. And of course, Corsola, within the Galar region, all passing away only to come back as ghosts. From fossils of the old world to Pokemon of the modern day, I've been able to find every Pokemon on the verge of extinction. Howdy there, I'm Krillic, connecting and learning about our world through Pokemon. There are shockingly far more Pokemon that have nearly gone extinct than I ever expected. Some have even been completely wiped out in some regions, while others have gone extinct or nearly extinct worldwide. Though this doesn't mean that I'll be talking about every rare Pokemon or starter Pokemon being on the verge of extinction. Just because they are rare doesn't mean they're actually on the verge of extinction. In fact, large numbers of them might exist just outside of where we can find them. This also applies to most legendary and mythical Pokemon, as there have been a number of instances where we can see multiple Latios and Latias at least appear within the movies, or even Pokemon such as the Creation Trio being reborn in an egg right before our very eyes within the games. In fact, many of our legendary and mythical Pokemon are likely related to Kami, effectively being spirits of nature itself in a pantheon of gods. This makes many of them immortal or able to be reborn time and time again, though all of that is covered in a different video. Despite all of this, there are two, potentially three exceptions to this rule if you go by a technicality. The one we might include by technicality is Mew, the ancestor to nearly every Pokemon on Earth. Typically, when we look at a common genetic ancestor, we find out there were many of them. And by typically, I mean literally every single time that I know of, since you can't have a genetic legacy without getting some babies out there to begin with and having a family tree. Mew, on the other hand, has a lot of confusing details that get mixed up over the years by the community, so to clear them up, we don't know if there are multiple Mew, and the fossil used to create Mewtwo was a fossilized eyelash, which it is possible to find DNA in if you have the follicle of the eyelash itself or any hair. Even just the Mew that we know is incredibly elusive, so even just finding the one that we are aware of has always been noted to be a Herculean task throughout the history of Pokemon. So imagine finding multiple Mew and actually being able to identify them as different creatures when Mew itself just likes to cause a little bit of fun and mischief and then teleport halfway across the planet. Or kill Jesse's mother in a snowstorm avalanche, but that's speculation, technically speaking. There's not going to be a solid answer here, but Mew's lineage should be all extinct, or there has only ever been one Mew to begin with, which starts to get back into the gray area of it being a Kami of nature or DNA, and removes it from ever having the possibility of being considered extinct. It'll just be reborn. Through this alternative way of thinking, Mew itself does still have the DNA of nearly every single Pokemon on the planet itself, so all it has to do is shed some DNA every once in a while, just a couple follicles here and there, maybe a little self-grown unique bacteria, and life will restart time and time again. This could even explain how life started on the planet to begin with after Mew was created. Take your pick as you will. This one was more of a technicality than anything, as I stated, and instead we can dig into two Pokemon of the mythical and legendary variety that we know are extinct. Genesect is an artificial Pokemon that was revived from a fossil and technologically enhanced by Team Plasma to create the most powerful Pokemon ever, or at least they'd like to think so. It is rumored within lore to have lived in the Paleozoic era, which puts it into a wide area of when it could have lived. So at least the Dex entries specifically state that it lived 300 million years ago. But before you start throwing out ideas of it being an ancient Scyther or even a Kabutops, let me break this one down for you. Beginning with Genesect's habits, it is shown to produce a silk-like substance from its claw that will harden into a brownish stone, and through this ability it creates its nest, something that the other two don't do already. They are communal with one leader, as we see in the Genesect movie as well, and their big old blaster is very similar to the pronotum of a tree hopper. The pronotum is the prominent plate-like structure that covers all or part of the thorax, the booty, technically, of some insects. But depending on how the pronotum is shaped or displayed, allows us to differentiate between insects. And in the case of Genesect here, its characteristics make it lean more and more towards the concept of being, as I said, a tree hopper. Honestly, depending on which ones you look at, we see the tree hopper with big ol' eyes and its pronotum sitting upon its body very similarly to how Genesect holds itself and its cannon. I find it incredibly odd it would have existed in the same time period as Pokemon like Kabuto, as this then claims or would line up, because that would imply then that Genesect is not an actual insect, for insects just kind of didn't really exist at that time. Honestly, Genesect seems like it should have a jaw even, but we don't know if that was because of Team Plasma's enhancements or if it was just because it actually had a jaw. This is incredibly important as jaws did not exist during that time period. They hadn't been evolutionarily developed at the point in time in which Kabuto would have existed, and is reflected through Pokemon like Kabuto and Ammonite, who would have lived within that period of time. And don't worry, we will get to all the fossil Pokemon today, but no matter how we spin it here, Genesect went extinct and would still be considered extinct. This is because, as far as we are aware, it is unable to breed and thus unable to have babies, meaning this is the end of their line genetically speaking all over again. This is very important when it comes to part of classifying what an extinct creature is. You can have all the Galapagos tortoises in the world, but if they're all male, then they are unable to breed and are considered functionally extinct, as their extinction is effectively guaranteed and they are unable to play a role in the ecosystem due to their population decline. Sorry, Genesect, but your revival means nothing in the grand scheme of your species, which is incredibly cruel the more we think about it, considering it still retains habits such as making those nests that I mentioned. Could you imagine it trying to go through a mating ritual only to realize that it can't have babies at all, and the depression that then sets in afterwards? That's rough. The Terapagos we know is the last of its species. It inhabited the Paldea region in a bygone era and was thought that this species went extinct, with it said to have been caught up in seismic shifts that occurred about 2 million years ago. However, one specimen managed to survive by crystallizing its own body and going into hibernation in the Area Zero underdepths, where it laid low until the present day. There strangely isn't a lot more that we could say about Terapagos. We could compare it to ancient turtle after ancient turtle, but that wouldn't be right to do since it locked itself away and never had any kin, no babies, meaning it isn't the ancestor to any Pokemon whatsoever. Well, unless we consider the idea that Glimmora might have only come into existence thanks to Terapagos' power, but it still wouldn't be genetically related since Terra energy isn't tied to genetics at all. It is just an energy being used by a Pokemon, and with enough shards of this energy, you can change the way their bodies then use it as you change their Terra typing. There's a lot of speculation that there might actually be other Terapagos out there somewhere, or even that the Terra Orbs we use might be hyper-dormant versions of Terapagos, but that's just some really fun and clever fan theorizing based on a number of different factors that could also just be chalked up as references towards our main turtle here. Now we dig into our fossil Pokemon. Not a pun I intended. And I will say now, I won't be heavily digging into them all since I have an entire video all about the complete prehistoric world of Pokemon, when they would have all lived, how they compare to their real life inspirations, and so much more. Instead, here I want to focus on fossil Pokemon within Galar and the Lentil region, because these are the only two regions so far in which fossil Pokemon still live and thrive, running around as if they had never gone extinct in the first place. The reasoning is vastly different for both of the regions. On one hand, in Galar, we have the infamous scientist Corsola, literally having her name deriving from the word careless. She, in particular, is a reference to the great fossil wars in real life that had occurred. During these wars, there were some incredibly careless archaeologists that were simply looking to slam some bones together, and not in the dirty way, and identify as many ancient creatures as possible to outdo their opponents. Due to this, they were literally just putting random pieces together and creating things like Dracovish and the rest of our mishmash Galar fossils. But with Corsola here, it didn't stop here. Instead, we have grown to understand that nearly every single fossil Pokemon that roams around Galar is a direct result of not only her, but other Pokemon trainers releasing these Pokemon into the wild after revival. No matter how you view this, this is a massive problem. On one hand, you have ancient creatures being brought back and suffering in the modern day as they cannot survive in the current climate, and on the other hand, you have fossils that are able to adapt. These fossil Pokemon, like Tyrantrum, then become not only deadly forces living freely in the wild, but they are also invasive species, being Pokemon that would not be approached or hunted as other creatures wouldn't even know what to do. They haven't existed for hundreds of thousands of millions of years at this point. They would not hunt them, and they would likely not fight them except in rare scenarios. Invasive species grow to then dominate a natural area, and I have seen in real life a lady beetle strut her stuff, or his stuff, whatever, right under a spider because while it looks like a regular ladybug, it produces a stench that makes predators back away. This likely wouldn't always work on spiders who used to it, but it always effectively works here, then meaning they could just create as many of their own kind as possible without any competition whatsoever as they outcompete other creatures who likely have the same diet, i.e. ladybugs. Now imagine instead of that, it was an 8'2", 600-pound dinosaur that is ready to rip apart others for its fill of food for the day with zero competition. That is, again, a massive problem, especially as it drives other Pokemon towards extinction. And we can move on to Kabuto next as an example. The sword entry states this species is almost entirely extinct. Kabuto molts every 3 days, making their shells harder and harder. And while the shield entry counters this by saying, while some say this species has gone extinct, Kabuto sightings are apparently fairly common in some places, which is in reference to the DLC or places in the real world where we can find many horseshoe crabs, the creature that Kabuto is inspired by. But for clarification, you can't get a Kabuto or Kabutops within Galar unless you trade for them or find them in the DLC. Which also gets strange because we might assume when revived, they leave the massive land and head towards the water, and then move on to a different massive land. And with no other naturally occurring versions of them anywhere else in the world, we can then claim that this was also due to the hand of Karalis. As such, we can definitively say once again, despite Pokédex entries, that Kabuto is extinct within Galar as they are anywhere else. But what about those fossil Pokemon that we find in Lentil? When looking through this region, we find a slew of them. This includes Tyrantrum, Archaeopteryx, and Aerodactyl in Volucha, while we find Cradily on the Lentil seafloor. This whole region being heavily protected by Xerneas and its designated Lumina Pokemon ever since a meteor first tried to crash land into the area. I would like to claim that this would represent the meteor that caused the last known mass extinction involving the dinosaurs 66 million years ago, I believe, but it isn't. And even if it was, there were a lot more things going on in the world that should have caused the deaths of all these ancient Pokemon, such as, the blotting out of the sky with ash everywhere and, molten glass effectively falling down and just killing everything. It was a terrible time. So not only did they survive that extinction, assumedly, they survived a meteor coming directly towards them. And this region continues to be the perfect climate, one that is able to support the lives of these Pokemon. Although Crinoids did have surviving relatives, but to see the dinosaurs on Volucha has some strong implications that would just delve into heavy speculation that I'm not going to get into here. As a side though, favorite fossil is specifically Arcan, and I actually have a tattoo of it, Gengar, and Mega Lucario. It is not seen very well. I really should get color on this thing. Maybe I'll just throw up a picture right after this. All as thanks to the community coming together to help the channel in need over a year ago. Though before we move on to some other ancient powered Pokemon and I put the lab coat back on, I just want to say thank you for watching. If you're enjoying this so far, subscribe as there are more hours of quality deep dive content here than you would be able to watch even in a single month if you didn't sleep. Let me know your own favorite fossil or if you have a Pokemon tattoo. Comments are always a delight to read, plus they boost the algorithm alongside hyping the video and sharing it with your friends. You can also like the video to let me know you want more content revolving around topics like this. It helps me when deciding new content. I want you coming back, of course. Lastly, thank you to members of the channel. If you want more behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month. It helps the channel more than you would imagine. But enough of all that. Thank you again, and on with the video. Similarly to fossil Pokemon, there are a few Pokemon that need the move Ancient Power in order to evolve, and they typically don't exist in most regions unless in the most extreme conditions, or specialized conditions. These Pokemon include Tangrowth, Yanmega, and Mamowswine. Even more than this, while all three can be found in Hisui, none of them can be found in the modern day of Sinnoh. Each of the environments in which they lived in have changed so dramatically over the years that their species eventually fell extinct. Now, I understand that this will still get into some strange technicalities, since all we need to do is evolve Tangela, Yanma, or Piloswine in the modern day in order to get these species back, but here's the problem. Once they evolve, they don't go back. They can't devolve like we see in special cases like Slowking. And if Mamowswine is stuck in a climate it's not suited for, like you just drop it in the middle of a Hoenn jungle, then it will just pass away, suffering the entire time, and becoming extinct all over again. In fact, while there are plenty of dex entries that state things like they dug up ancient Mamowswine, we once again see in the Sword dex entry that they were thought to have gone extinct long ago. This once again allows us to look at places such as the Slippery Slope in Galar's Crown Tundra to see that we can find a Wanderer in that area. Though this once again allows us to look at each of the Pokemon and find the special locations in which they do live in the wild naturally and haven't gone extinct, or can at least have their population maintained for the time being. In the case of Mamowswine, the coldest stretches of land are the best, finding it here at Slippery Slope, near Qram's lair, and while we ride them in Kalos, we can't find any naturally occurring wild Mamowswine. Instead, we can run into Piloswine in the Frost Cavern, north of Dendemil Town, which in turn is west of Route 17, where the Mamowswine Road is traversed. But if Qram were to leave its lair, then we'd only be left with the Slippery Slope in terms of places to find Mamowswine in the world. Well, that location, and I guess wherever Regigigas summoned all those Mamowswine from the Giratina movie. Moving on to Yanmega, in the modern day it can only be found in two places within the main games, being within Route 3 and Pinwheel Forest, only in Black 2, White 2. It is an incredibly large forest, but otherwise there really isn't too much to note. We could say that it was being protected, or rather the forest was, so that way it could grow properly and house many unique Pokemon, as we do find Virizion there in the first games, but then Virizion isn't there in the sequels, which I feel is a pretty reasonable thing to speculate. Lastly, Tangrowth is also only found on Route 13, and the giant chasm that houses Qram in both Unova games. You'd expect it to be more of a tropical Pokemon, but considering all those vines are just growths from its body, it's actually an incredibly durable species. Each of these three Pokemon can also be found within the Lentil region, Tangrowth in a moderate climate, Yanmega within a dense jungle, and Mamowswine in the coldest lands you'd expect to find it in. Once again, this just confirms for us that they can continue to live if only the environment would support their needs. And unfortunately, needs are not met within the majority of Pokemon regions. Even when they were supported in Hisui, time would change. It would become warmer and their kind would pass away, leaving only their previous forms who needed less food, less space, and weren't burdened with too much fur in the case of Mamowswine. Honestly, it's things like this that do make me wonder if all Pokemon actually started off as their final forms, the hardiest, most powerful, most durable forms that they have. Then over time, they would devolve, traits being left behind as they develop new, quote-unquote, weaker forms, as these bigger, stronger forms are no longer needed, much like what we would see with Galarian Darmanitan, as it grows a cold organ while still housing an atrophied fire organ within its body. And since we're already here, I may as well mention that this Pokemon gets incredibly strange because Galarian Darumaka and many other regional forms are considered the same species. They keep the same Pokédex number as our primary example, but scientifically speaking, this doesn't make the most sense unless we categorize it as a subspecies, which is effectively what they are. We can support this further by looking at their age groups, which stay exactly the same despite regional forms having different habits, different typings, different everything really. But to make it easier to understand, we can effectively just consider them similar to dogs. From BBC Science Focus, we have the following to help us out. Domestic dogs evolved between 17,000 and 33,000 years ago. Most breeds, which have been artificially selected by humans, have arisen very recently within the last 200 years. Visually, a Chihuahua is the chalk to a Great Dane's cheese, yet they are still the same species. Hey, Odie, how do you feel about being called the chalk of a species? You want to come here? You want to comment on that? Come here. We have an Odie appearance, everybody. Odie, how do you feel about being the chalk of the species, huh? How do you feel about that? You want to stick around for this explanation? Do you have any comments on it? You were sleeping. I don't think she's very happy with me right now. Yet, despite being the chalk and the Great Dane being the cheese, they are still the same species, Canis lupus familiaris, and are direct descendants of the gray wolf. All domestic dog breeds are able to interbreed to give birth to reproductively viable offspring. You don't want to breed with the Great Dane. You would explode. I love you. I'm going to put you back now. Also, for clarification, yes, Odie is a girl. Her full name is Othello. I named her before I knew her gender, and we just kept the name anyway, or rather, I kept the name. But, back on track, this is because their genomes remain relatively unchanged, despite their physical characteristics appearing so different. This key evidence tells us that various dog breeds are not in the running to become a new species anytime soon. It takes a long time for mutations, which cause inheritable changes to characteristics to arise within populations. So now take all of this info and translate it over to our regional forms. None of them have gone extinct by this standard. They are still here. This then extends to their Hisuian variants as well, alongside some special case scenarios, as you'd already know thanks to the thumbnail. The only real extinct variants then would be Hisuian evolved forms, technically, assuming that they truly are gone and can't be found anywhere else, much like the ancient power trio that we had just talked about. Now take all of that with a grain of salt though, because we clearly don't see their Hisuian forms within the modern day Sinnoh, or at least we don't see all of them. Nor do we even see the Hisuian forms of Pokemon like Braviary or Relicanth, so they may have migrated or gone extinct within Sinnoh. It's hard to know for sure. I also wouldn't include the Hisuian starter evolutions because they weren't even native to Hisui to begin with. They were all brought to the region by Professor Laverton, so we know nothing about their populations or where they are actually from. We could assume the regions in which we find them in the modern day are the ones where they're from, and while that is plausible, it might have been different in the past, and starter Pokemon kind of get complicated overall. One of the special cases I would like to talk about is Zorua and its regional form, because this is unfortunately one case where their species did not need to go extinct, but absolutely did thanks to the folly of mankind. You've heard this story a million times, I'm sure, and if not, then allow me to be brief. Because Zorua is inspired by the Kitsune, more specifically the ones that are described to be shapeshifters that bewitch others and cause not only mischief, but great harm to humans everywhere. But unlike the myth in our world, this truly does exist within the world of Pokemon. The only exception is that they aren't inherently malevolent creatures. The sad and unfortunate part is that the myths that would be shared in our world are considered warnings by people within the Pokemon world, real warnings, causing them to attack and chase Zorua away wherever they are. All the way to the point where the Zorua would be pushed out of the lands in which they could survive. They then could only wait until they died to the frigid cold lands in deep Hisui, mourned only by a mother, childless now and full of seething hatred. This hatred transforms Zoroark, shifting it into its Hisuian form, while the child is reborn as a ghost, a revenant in fact, becoming a normal ghost Pokemon as they both lose their dark typing. Their illusions are no longer underhanded tricks, they are real and can cause great harm to the body and to the mind. So not only do all the Zorua of old Sinnoh die, but then we have these revenant Pokemon seeking revenge. Though it doesn't end there, because rumors had been spread stating that if one could befriend these Pokemon, then they would be great allies and companions to those that they trust. Now, to me, I see a Revenant finding peace through this idea, finding love and acceptance, all that it had ever wanted in life. And if humanity no longer casts great hate onto their kind, then they in turn would have no hate in return, eventually causing the Hisuian Zorua line to no longer be born, and for this species as a whole to fall extinct in arguably one of the most peaceful ways possible. Once again though, this species would already have technically been long extinct since their original bodies died and they are nothing but ghosts, which, yes, there are plenty of ghost Pokemon that can breed, and that gets to be incredibly complicated, but I'm not digging into that today. To me, that is more of a mechanic than a lore thing. Otherwise, Yamask makes 0 sense, and so does Phantump and a number of others, which it just kind of reminds me of all the people who still comment and say Pokemon eating sandwiches and Galarian curry make them all omnivores canonically, which is just blatantly incorrect, thanks to many Pokedex entries that make it very clear what the diets of Pokemon are without speculation. Nevertheless, this species has definitely fallen extinct within history before it was ever Sinnoh. Even then, it gets incredibly weird, as there are very few modern-day areas in which we find regular Zorua. Oris, Route 101 in the post-game, Trainer School in Ultra Sun, Ultra Moon, Galar DLC, and then finally in a few areas within Paldea. Though even in Paldea, they disguise themselves perfectly, meaning it's hard to truly know if they've gone extinct, what their population counts are, or even if they're once again just hiding away in plain sight without us ever knowing. You likely already know the tale of Lapras. For not years, but entire generations, we have been told by the Pokédex that their numbers were low, all to the point of near extinction, all because of them being overhunted. You heard that right. People have driven Lapras to near extinction through overhunting, and I'm willing to bet that the shell on its back is the primary focus for hunting their species down. You could say that their meat is a reason, of course, too, but their shells seem to be something that would be valuable, especially as the Pokemon is so closely related to music and sound overall, especially as we look at that G-Max form. It's a little dark because honestly these guys are known to be incredibly intelligent, can understand human speech, sing in a good mood and to their offspring, and are known to have incredibly gentle hearts. The only time they really fight back is when they're really pushed against a wall, and for good reason because they're kind of beasts. It wasn't until Generation 7, Alola, that we finally get the entry that states they've been so cherished that there's now an overabundance. The fish population has declined in waters with too many Lapras. And lovingly, the community has often attributed it to people who have talked about helping Lapras populations come back by breeding and releasing them into the wild, like as actual players. Brock would be proud. So this sounds like a new problem though. The idea of fish Pokemon dropping dramatically, and this is par for the course. When something surges back, something else has to quote-unquote suffer for it. When wolves are introduced back to a landscape where they once lived and disappeared, the deer population will drop. Also saying disappeared is wrong, they were hunted. More low-growing shrubs and grass will flourish, and the landscape itself will eventually change. Although to be more accurate, there are other animals that would eat grass way more than deer, but I'm not going to dig through every example in the book. Let's take a tangent though, because this could even cause some strange imbalances because let's say we work to bring back more forbs and small trees, causing deer population to rise and for predators to have their food source restored. Well, while more predators are attracted to more deer who have been attracted to more of their preferred food source, there are other animals whose populations may not have increased. This was the case for some elk in one area, meaning that as predator populations rose as an effect of the deer population rising, the elk population stayed stagnant, resulting in their own population issues. I will say again though, take that story with a grain of salt. I strongly believe it's the elk, but it could have also been moose or caribou, all because they were all reintroduced to Wisconsin and learning about those struggles in college on how this was all done. It actually might have been caribou and not elk. I'm not 100% sure now. But it's also been a number of years since then, that's why I'm a little foggy on it. And we can see now, though, how this might play a role in Lapras, as this marine reptile is absolutely one of the apex predators of the Pokemon world. It may or may not be a keystone species, but at the very least, Sharpedo isn't even going to mess with it, as we see in Pokemon Snap. We're going to jump a little all over the place today to keep you on your toes, but up next is Corsola and Galarian Corsola, another exception to our regional variants rule. Once again, we find ourselves with a Pokemon that canonically straight up dies, and then comes back as a spirit. This one also being a little bit vengeful. Found in the warm, shallow waters of southern seas, Corsola requires clean water to live. If its habitat is dirty, the growths on its back become discolored and degenerate. However, when it is healthy, its growths regularly shed and grow back. It is able to regrow them over the course of a single night. It forms large social groups. Occasionally, these groups get so large then that people may live atop them, as is the case with Pacific Log Town. Now, I would say they're nothing more than coral, but even regular coral exists within the world of Pokemon, which is a living creature as well. And this next part is incredibly important because it will tell us everything we need to know about Corsola's inspirations and its regional forms inspirations. From National Geographic Education, I have the following. There are about 6,000 species of coral around the world, with some species growing in warm, shallow waters near coastlines and others thriving on the dark, cold sea floor of the open ocean. Though coral may look like a colorful plant growing from roots in the sea floor, it is actually an animal. Corals are known as colonial organisms because many individuals live and grow while connected to each other. They're also dependent on one another for survival. The tiny individual organisms that make up large coral colonies are called coral polyps. The polyps use ions in seawater to make limestone exoskeletons, skeletons outside the body, for themselves. A coral polyp is shaped like a cylinder with a mouth at one end, surrounded by tentacles. The arm-like tentacles gather food and sting creatures that threaten the coral. After food is digested, the polyp's waste products exit through the mouth. Coral polyps' bodies are usually clear. The bright colors that characterize many corals are actually various types of algae growing in the polyp's tissue. The presence of the algae, specifically a type of algae called zooxanthellae, helps the coral in several ways. For one, the algae removes waste from the coral. The algae also use the coral's waste products for photosynthesis, which is how a plant makes its own food, of course. Byproducts of photosynthesis include oxygen and carbohydrates, which the coral consumes and uses to build reefs. The mutually beneficial relationship between coral and algae is of course called symbiosis. Coral reefs not only provide marine species with a rich habitat, but they also assist people as well. Millions of people around the world would rely on fish caught in and around coral reefs. The reefs also draw in tourists, which helps the local economies. Coral reefs protect people and land from storms as well, serving as a barrier that reduces the impact of large waves on shore. Further research and protection of coral reefs is important, in large part because the world has lost nearly 20% of these coral reefs, with many more reefs under threat today. Pollution and increasing ocean temperatures are two major causes of the reef loss, a problem that can have long-reaching effects on humans and marine species alike. Both pollution and warming waters can cause coral bleaching, a process where stressed corals expel their symbiotic algae, causing them to turn white, which should sound familiar. The absence of the zooxanthellae causes the coral to have a more limited access to food, and this increases their susceptibility to diseases. From assisting the people of Pacifidlog to their death in the shifting climate of Galar, their color change and everything, it all becomes as clear as Corsola's spectral body. As per Galarian Corsola's info to tie it home, they were wiped out by sudden changes in the climate and ocean temperature, turning them into ghost types. They're often found in the remains of prehistoric seas. So, the shifting climate of Galar happened long ago, likely whenever Eternatus crashed down onto the planet. Originally, I attributed this shift to humanity's follies, but that is horribly incorrect. Long story short, the way I like to explain it, as I've checked with past colleagues and professors, is this. Climate change and global warming are technically normal, but the rate at which it happens due to humanity's influence is not. It is accelerated. It causes hard fluctuations of climate and weather and leaves animals, plants, fungi, literally every little living thing with less time to adapt and evolve to then survive through the next generation. If I remember correctly, we're actually expecting another ice age well beyond our time, but I think that still gets into speculation, supported by trend data, so it's messy, and I'm not the expert here regarding this anyhow. I'm just a science communicator effectively. So ultimately, yeah, the meteor came down, that is Eternatus, it caused a massive climate change, and then humans are still causing a couple of issues, accelerating it in their own way. Now, if you're wondering whether Corsola houses other Pokemon for safety, it does. In fact, it is directly noted that small Pokemon like Horsea and Luvdisc are sometimes sheltered by Corsola's branches and even offer it protection from foes, which Horsea is 1'4" and Luvdisc are 2 feet tall, so I'm going to assume that Corsola colonies are what houses them and not a singular Corsola, as that would make the most sense. And as a final note, I really do love Corsola and its Galarian form together. They're arguably one of, if not my favorite, regional forms, all because this unfortunate tie to real-life Coral. But on a positive note, During my time in Florida last year, I visited a beach where artificial coral reefs were placed. Basically, a structure is placed that can support coral and is protected from then on in order to create homes and support the lives of various marine creatures in the area. I do wish I had better pictures from when I went, but it was when my fiance and I were scuba diving, which was really one of the highlights of our trip outside of seeing my family, and it was genuinely magical. One of the best experiences I've ever had, as I really felt like I was part of an animal's world and not a human-dominated world. Please, let reincarnation be real, and let me be an animal. Also, let my fiance come back as like the same creatures so she can torment me for all of eternity. Or at least, maybe a crocodile and a plover. That would also work. Something symbiotic, please. Kangaskhan took me a while to track it down info on because Bulbapedia and every other site states they were nearly hunted to extinction without a source being given on it. As it turns out, we could track it down to Pokemon episode 34 of the original animated series, The Kangaskhan Kid. Here we learn that a special jungle is heavily protected by Officer Jenny, who is technically not an officer, but a safari ranger. We learn there are poachers in the area, and the Kangaskhan are part of this forest, making the connection pretty clear that they are protected. And it is noted that while it is considered an amusement park, it is a special Pokemon preserve, housing many Pokemon that you will not otherwise see in the area. Some had populations within the region in the past, others are just from other regions without any other explanation. Once again, I personally went to something almost exactly like a safari zone, a place called Wild Florida. You pay, and you drive your car slowly through a wide open area where you will encounter tons of different animals. This includes elk, emu that walked right up to my car and were ready to bite my face off, zebras, camels, and more. I learned a lot about this place as they take incredibly special care of their animals, and while yes, there are attractions, these attractions are important towards driving attention to these animals in need of help and funding the work and resources needed to keep them happy and healthy. As part of this, I even got to pet a sloth, which still makes me a little giddy on the inside, and the lady who was its handler, the sloth's name being Guy, by the way, clearly stated they never force the animals to do anything they don't want to. And boy, howdy was that true, as that sloth, as Guy, just wanted to stay by the heater to stay extra warm and would not come out to be seen, so we fed it corn one by one. But back to Kangaskhan, now that we understand how these safari zones actually work and why they're technically seen as amusement parks but are more about just funding them. While we know Kangaskhan is a kangaroo, we have to ask, why is it nearly hunted to extinction? Aren't kangaroos incredibly abundant? From Australian Geographic, I have the following. Do you know what kind of animal the mala, nabalek, or booty is? What about the Monjun, Northern Betong, or Gilbert's Patoru? If you answer that they are different species of kangaroo, the collective term for more than 50 species of Australian hopping marsupials, you'd be right, but you'd be in the minority. Include nearby New Guinea, and the number of kangaroo species jumps to more than 70. Kangaroos are so diverse that they have been dubbed Australia's most successful evolutionary product. But sadly, not everyone is aware of this great diversity, so most kangaroo species remain obscure and unknown. This is brought into sharp relief by a new movie that premieres nationally, or at least at the week of them writing this, called Kangaroo: A Love-Hate Story. The filmmakers set out to expose the kangaroo industry, painting a picture of gruesome animal cruelty, an industry cloaked in secrecy, and the wholesale slaughter of an Australian icon. The film, which includes brutal footage, also includes the claim that Australia's kangaroos may be heading down the path of extinction. On mainland Australia, 4 species are sustainably harvested, largely for their meat or fur: the eastern grey, western grey, common wallaroo, and Australia's most famous icon and largest marsupial, the red kangaroo. The best scientific survey data, based on millions of square kilometers surveyed by aircraft each year, puts the combined number of these 4 kangaroo species currently at around 46 million animals. This is a conservative estimate because only the rangelands where kangaroos are subject to government-sanctioned harvest are surveyed. There's almost as much kangaroo habitat again that is not surveyed. Of the estimated population, a quota of roughly 15% is set for the following year, of which barely a quarter is usually filled. Quotas are set and enforced by state governments with the aim of sustaining population numbers. But what of the other forgotten 95% of kangaroo species? The conservation prognosis for these, especially the smaller ones under about 5.5 kilograms in weight, is far less rosy. The nabalek, a small endangered rock wallaby from Australia's northwest, has become so rare that its mainland population in the Kimberley seems to have disappeared. It is now only found on a few islands off the coast. The booty, which sounds like booty, a small burrowing species of bitong, was one of Australia's most widespread mammals at the time of European arrival, but is extinct on the mainland and now found on just a few islands. Gilbert's poltaroo holds the title of Australia's most endangered mammal, clinging precariously to existence in the heathlands around Albany on Western Australia's south coast. One intense wildfire could wipe out this species in the wild. Meanwhile, if the alarming increasing impact of cats on the northern Australian wildlife continues, recent modeling suggests that the northern bitong, a diminutive kangaroo that weighs barely a kilogram, will disappear. The list goes on. Mala, bridle nail-tail wallaby, Parma wallaby, walleye, banded hair wallaby, long-footed poltaroo, Proserpine rock wallaby. I almost got them all in the first go. All of these and more could slip to extinction right under our noses. The culprits are the usual suspects: cats, foxes, land use change, and our collective apathy and ignorance. Basically, people not caring and people not being aware. Australia holds the title for the worst record of mammal extinctions in modern times, and kangaroos, unfortunately, contribute many species to that list. In much shorter words, the regulated and harvested kangaroos for meat are safe, but the other non-regulated wild species may be going extinct and can do so incredibly easily with one bad tragedy, and Kangaskhan may very well be representative of this. Although I will add in, it may also be representative of the prehistoric giant kangaroo that went extinct thousands of years ago. After all, Kangaskhan isn't in the field age group like many of our other mammals. It's only in the monster age group, something often associated with reptiles, dinosaurs, and even is the age group closest related to the dragon age group when we look at how many species they share between them. So no matter how we spin this, Kangaskhan is a Pokemon in need of protecting. And as for the rest of the Safari Zone Pokemon, we'll talk about them later. Not every single one seems to be endangered, but there are some incredible surprises. Along the line of ancient creatures, we have Relicanth, which is direct inspiration from the Coelacanth, something you likely first learned about when watching the movie Atlantis. What a beautiful age of animation and writing that was. I was a bigger fan of Treasure Planet myself, but both are good. Both are good. Nevertheless, Relicanth really is just the Pokemonified Coelacanth, a copying of Homework, if you would. It has remained unchanged for 100 million years and stays as such because it is already, as Pokemon notes, a perfect life form. It was discovered during a deep-sea expedition, and Relicanth's name comes from an explorer whose name served as a variation of it. When we look at coelacanths in the real world, they too have hardly changed in all the 400 million years that they have been on our planet, outlasting even Relicanth in this capacity, making it perfect, I guess. But there's something a little different here. While I can't speak to the genetics of Relicanth, the coelacanths of the modern day are distinct from their ancient relatives. It's basically like imagining a multi-thousand generational great-grandparent. Are we related and the same species? Yes, but we are going to be so incredibly different by comparison. And if Relicanth is anything like the coelacanth, then it is one of the suspected few first species to first waltz its way onto the land and jumpstart the terrestrial takeover. They are a wonder, being pregnant for about a year to then give live birth, having multiple fins that move in a coordinated fashion like a walking reptile unlike other fish, and performing rotating headstands that are thought to be a way for them to detect weak electrical impulses of their prey. As per the National History Museum, adding to the list of unusual characteristics is that the coelacanth is supported by a notochord rather than a robust spine. Coelacanths have a bony skull, which we can also see in Relicanth and Rockhead, which has an intracranial joint appends in a new window, a hinge that allows the fish to open its mouth especially wide. This feature isn't seen in any other living vertebrae. These things are a wonder, living incredibly deep in the ocean, near or in caves where the temperatures are reminiscent of the ancient world that they used to live in, and that habit is shared by Relicanth, even being shown in the Pokemon Manaphy movie. The big reason it's even on this list is because the coelacanth was thought to have been extinct long ago, only to suddenly appear one day and for the science world to lose their collective minds. To think a living fossil, as we like to call it, here in the scaly flesh. In addition, we really don't know their populations even to this day. We expect them to be pretty small in number overall, but we don't really know. And it doesn't help that because of the title of rare living fossil being slapped onto it, a whole black market had sprung up regarding them. All while we hardly know if we will ever find another relative of their species. So we can only search and wait, study our waters, and support the ecosystem as best as we can during our search. Except for me, I'm not doing the search. I don't do deep sea stuff. No thank you. Specifically, East Sea Shellos' population is in decline as of the release of Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. When we look at Pokedex entries, we can find that the West Sea Shellos takes up residence by warm waters, meanwhile the East Sea Shellos take residence by cold waters, helping us explain this. In addition, while originally it is stated that they can both stay on land until their skin dries out, once the West and East entries started being separated into different descriptions in the Pokedex, this trait can only be found on East Sea Shellos. Which this makes me think of Paldean Wooper, a Pokemon who only exists because other Pokemon outcompeted Wooper in marshy, wet environments where it had better access to water and then pushed them to be on land more, covering their bodies in mud in order to survive better and eventually becoming their Paldean variant. What I find even more interesting is that there are rumors of a North and South Shellos thanks to Pokopia as a spearhead on that. What this means is unclear, but we could look at the primary inspiration for these Pokemon to help us find out, which is the Nudibranch. According to the state of California, warmer ocean waters can cause marine animals like the Nudibranch, sea slug, Fidiana, Hiltoni, P. Hiltoni, we'll go with that, found along the coasts of California and Mexico to temporarily move north until temperatures cool down. As climate change drives ocean warming, these northward shifts may become permanent. The movement of small, short-lived marine animals like P. Hiltoni into new habitats can have major impacts on local ecosystems. For example, its arrival along the northern coast has caused a decline in resident nudibranch populations that it preys on and competes with for resources. Range shifts can provide important insights into how marine animals are responding to climate change. A species like P. Hiltoni that undergoes a permanent range shift may foreshadow how other species will respond to changing ocean conditions. We're finding out that while there are tons of speculation regarding the Shellos species, we claim its diet, we claim location, ultimately the reason for their color differences are seemingly meaningless. And by that effect, by technicality, the East Sea Shellos may go extinct due to the warming waters that are reflected within the world of Pokemon that are happening in the real world. Especially as nudibranches in the real world are facing acidification of water and all the same dangerous shifts in climate that harshly affect them. Alternatively though, since all Shellos can breed with each other despite physical differences, maybe just like our regional variants or even the Hisuian forms in specific, they can come back, and for a while we may just have South and West Sea Shellos for a while if they ever make South Shellos a thing, up until hopefully the waters cool back down and East Sea Shellos can come back. I realize I did not talk about Wyrdeer as a Pokemon that is directly implied to be extinct in the modern day as opposed to many of the other Hisuian variants. Stantler are said to no longer be capable of evolving into Wyrdeer, and these Pokemon are not found anywhere at all. Some people might claim that this is through hunting, but the Dex entry doesn't state this. In fact, it just says the fur shed from their beard is a useful material for winter clothing. We aren't PETA people. We aren't going to start claiming sheep have to die in order to shear their wool, and we're not going to start to claim that Wyrdeer have to die in order for us to get some beard hair. But why can't they evolve into this form anymore? Well, it's likely for two reasons. One is that things did get warmer over the many different years between Hisui and the modern day. As such, many Pokemon commonly aren't seen with such thick fur or hide anymore, which is exactly what happened with Hisui and Growlithe as well. The other reason is because they don't need this form anymore. Wyrdeer has far more powerful psychic powers, having the capability to distort space, create invisible barriers, and it has some strong, sturdy legs that gallop across the land and through all the snow. Its horns are far larger and look far more powerful too, making this Pokemon, with all of its traits, capable of leading herds to safety. But as the climate warmed and the dangers lessened due to migration of species, Wyrdeer would no longer need to be here. Its job was done, and its family lineage is safe. Less pressure, less competition, less of a chance for evolution, and this would continue for generations until modern-day Stantler are no longer capable of transforming anymore. This truly is a species lost. gone extinct. But at least it was out of a lack of necessity and not because of harmful external factors. Togepi is easily one of my favorite Pokemon. Its entire line is, really, but their species are incredibly strange and has been the center of theorizing for a long time. Whether it be a Pokemon brought from the future by Celebi, or a Pokemon that could have some relation to Latios and Latias thanks to that triangle patterning, there's a lot going on. But there is an answer that we find here, at least within the anime, because we get the Togepi Paradise, a place where all forms of the Togepi line go to lie and wait. They hatch and grow up here, only to leave when they can spread joy to the world, or enter the world in a time of peace, as we would then see with Togekiss. What's most interesting about this is that the Togepi Paradise and Mirage Kingdom exist within the same space with each other, and this is found within the Hoenn region. You heard it here first, guys, gals, and non-binary pals. The Mirages that we find in Omega Ruby, Alpha Sapphire, and honestly technically in the OG games, are likely a direct reference to Mirage Kingdom and Togepi Paradise. The only way you can get a Togepi egg in Hoenn, though, is after you've dealt with Kyogre or Groudon, in which you get its egg from a lady in the hot spring. This once again plays into the lore that Togepi can only exist in a world of peace. If you look throughout all the games, you'll find that you can only get this Pokemon in very rare scenarios, scripted events, or only after you've completed the main story, making it clear that this is the symbol of peace. I'm also now imagining Togepi as All Might. But in the event that the world does fall to any of the evil leaders, such as what we see with the members of Team Rainbow Rocket, then Togepi will effectively no longer be around within our world. By all technicality, they are not extinct by any means, but we would again never really know. Persian is a bit on the iffy side on its endangerment until we dig deeper. It's because its noted to have been hunted heavily for its valuable forehead gem. There isn't much to be said beyond this, but we can tie this very easily to mountain lions, otherwise known as cougars, since it kind of represents them the most. From the National Wildlife Federation, the historic range of the mountain lion included almost all North and South America. While there are still several thousand mountain lions in the wild, their population has significantly decreased from historic levels due to habitat destruction, anti-predator campaigns, conflicts with livestock, and general persecution by humans. The eastern cougar, a subspecies of mountain lion, was declared officially extinct by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in 2011, although individuals from more western populations have been confirmed to wander as far as the east coast. Florida panthers, a subspecies of mountain lion alive today, are listed as endangered on the U.S. list of endangered species. Don't know why I had to say it like that. When we try to look at Persian's encounter locations, we find them only on Route 7 in the original Gold, Silver, and Crystal games, but their populations are higher in Fire Red, Leaf Green only, are non-existent in the Let's Go games, and then finally we find them in decent numbers within Paldea, making a solid tie to their populations definitely being stagnated and even endangered, with exception to the very warm environment of Paldea. And before we do move on to the next Pokemon, I want to say this probably sounds incredibly depressing, talking about so many creatures, fantasy and in reality, that are endangered or going extinct, but this is the reality of our world. And if we keep looking away, we can't help. If you keep covering your eyes whenever you see something bad, you're not going to be able to do something about the problem in front of us. In addition, this also sucks to say, but some things are meant to go extinct, but at a safe rate that allows the next species, or rather the next kind of their species, to take their place and thrive. And we need to be painfully aware of what we do so we can help them with this process in spite of all the damage that we have caused as humanity took over the planet. We may not be able to save every creature, but we have the ability to save at least one, and keep working with band-aid solutions until we hopefully find not one singular permanent answer, but a plethora of permanent solutions that work cohesively together to create a much better world. It's depressing and inspiring all the same to me. And as I grow larger with this channel, I want to be able to contribute more towards projects that help our world rather than just spreading awareness. Just some stuff that I wanted to get out. The next one is another technicality since Dreepy went extinct a very long time ago, and the one we know about today is just the half-revived version of it. And I say half revived because it doesn't need to eat at all. Specifically, it's stated Dreepy are reborn ghosts of a prehistoric species that once lived in ancient seas. It generally retains the same behaviors it had when it was alive, as it tends to wander locations where it once lived, as well as biting at Clauncher as if to eat them, but it doesn't. We drive it home again by looking at its real-life direct inspiration and another one of my favorite creatures of the prehistoric world, the Diplocalus. I lovingly call this thing Boomerang Head, but once again, instead of telling you all about this guy, I'm instead going to direct you towards my prehistoric world of Pokemon video. I want to move on to the Johto Safari Zone, even though we're kind of going to mix Hoenn and Johtos together, and how some of the Pokemon found in one we will find in the other. But the Johto Safari Zone is a place where, at least in Heart Gold Soul Silver, you can manage the safari itself and make it more habitable for Pokemon overall, now that it has reached its new location. The only issue with this Safari Zone in specific is that there is a slew of Gen 3 and Gen 4 Pokemon that are included within it that are only found in the zone, making it more like a mechanic to encounter Pokemon such as Torkoal and Gible. But at least this isn't the case for all the Pokemon that I have found. Now, I have already cross-referenced the Pokemon I am talking about today, because while Geodude is included in the Safari Zone, it is more of a filler for the zones, just like Oddish would be as well. Pokemon that help fill out the ecology of the zone and overall populations to make things run smoothly. Their populations are pretty high in any region that they do appear in typically, so they and many others I will not be talking about today, even if they are found in a Safari Zone. But despite this, we still have quite this slew of Pokemon that are considered endangered within their regions. This is primarily supported by encounter rates, as they are a percentile, meaning if there is a 10% chance to find a Bellsprout, for example, then we could expect it to be 10 different Bellsprout out of 100. And if not only this number is low, but also we find the Pokemon in only 1 or 2 areas or none at all, then we have contenders for them to be endangered. Magmar are highly dependent on volcanoes, which are their preferred home environment, and they are only found in the Burned Tower of Johto, Mount Silver's Cave within Crystal, Mount Ember and Leaf Green, Wheeler Volcano Park in Alola, and then a number of locations within Galar DLC areas, which tends to be like the catch-all. We do also find them on Fire Spit Island within Legends Arceus, but I believe this environment eventually gives way to no longer support Magmar populations in the future. I do genuinely doubt that Magmar would ever fully go extinct, because if all the volcanoes in the world would completely stop functioning, I believe that would spell bad news regarding our planet's core, with how heat is generated and how metal and rock moves around the world and electromagnetism and blah 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 blah. The most that can effectively be said is that Magmar may come and go with the dormancy or activity of volcanoes on the surface more than anything. So they may seem wiped out in some regions, but they're probably deep below the surface, wandering around. I shouldn't have been surprised to find out that the living punching bag that is Wobbuffet would have incredibly low populations. Even when we look at Wynot, it only appears as a swarm in Unova and max raids in Galar, which leans more into mechanics than natural ecology. They are only also found naturally on Route 130 on Mirage Island, which goes underwater completely. Those Wynot, I do not know how they are surviving. Then when we look back at Wobbuffet, they have low populations in Johto's Dark Cave, the Cerulean Cave, Ruin Valley, Reflection Cave, and at least a number of other normal locations in Galar. Once again, there are Pokemon radar findings, but those get really weird on if they're normal encounters or for mechanics' sake. Either way, this line of Pokemon has some real scarce populations and safe locations to exist in. And when we take into account that they do not hunt, they do not attack first, they simply take hits in order to train themselves to reflect attacks better, we find out real easily why their populations are real low. It's almost like they're a filler species of the ecosystem that don't really do much in the grand scheme of things other than eat fruit and spread seeds by pooping. This leads me to a very important point. Endangered species are identified not just by low numbers, but by rates of decline, restricted habitats, and low genetic diversity relative to historical levels. In other words, how fast is the population dropping, or is it stable? Do they have a wide array of habitats, or are they restricted to fewer, which then means if that habitat is eliminated, so are they, like the kangaroos on that one singular island. And then lastly, with low genetic diversity, it means that they will inbreed, have more genetic issues, which makes them more susceptible to diseases as well as just wiping them out. For that last bit, if there are only 50 different individuals, then sure, inbreeding can technically be effectively avoided, but 500 individuals are needed in order to properly adapt and evolve as a species properly. So when we look at Hoenn to find basically no properly safe populations of Wynaut, and how Wobbuffet is only really found in the Safari Zone there, then we see why they would be at risk of becoming extinct within Hoenn. Cubone is not only a rare species, but is absolutely an endangered species that is fairly mysterious in how they are officially created. Sure, we can claim they are Kangaskhan children that are evolving differently thanks to losing their mothers, but even without that, we have a strange world for it. Every single natural spawn for Cubone, quote-unquote spawn, only exists due to humans, such as what we see in Lavender Tower thanks to Team Rocket killing their mothers. And when that tower is transformed into a radio tower, then we see them in the rock tunnel nearby instead. From here, they swarm in Sinnoh, are in the Safari Zone by Heart Gold Soul Silver, which is when the Lavender Tower is officially converted, and then finally within Glittering Cave for Kalos. Even when we look at Wheeler Volcano Park, we know that their population is being created due to the sheer harshness of the environment with all the grass and water type Pokemon. Overall, even as we just dig through all their territories and how their populations are made, they still continue to be endangered. It's almost like people in their world understand how they are created and then work towards at least supporting the new orphans into adulthood. Sandshrew used to have populations all over the place in the original Kanto games and even within Johto caves, but by the time we make it to our 4th generation here with Heart Gold Soul Silver, they only have Union Cave and Mount Moon as natural encounters. Otherwise, even within Soul Silver, they can only be caught via the Goldenrod Game Corner, quote-unquote caught, and in the Safari Zone Desert. I would like to compare this species to be most like the pangolin, another one of the best creatures on the planet and objectively cooler than an armadillo. Sorry, armadillo lovers, they're cute, but the pangolin always looks like it's too nervous to ask a question, which I find adorable. From the World Wildlife Federation, these solitary, primarily nocturnal animals are easily recognized by their full armor of scales. A startled pangolin will cover its head with its front legs, exposing its scales to any potential predator. If touched or grabbed, it will roll up completely into a ball, while the sharp scales on their tail can be used to lash out. Also called scaly anteaters because of their preferred diet, pangolins are the most trafficked mammal in the world, with demand primarily in Asia and in growing amounts in Africa for their meat and scales. There's also demand in the United States for pangolin products, particularly for their leather to be used in boots, bags, and belts. That bothers me. Just skin the humans instead. I don't care. I'm gonna make the joke. It's not a joke. Skin the humans instead. I don't care anymore. There are currently 8 species of pangolin recognized by the International Union of Conservation of Nature, ranging from vulnerable to critically endangered. However, recent research indicates there could be more pangolin species. The 8 pangolin species are found on 2 continents and are protected under national and international laws, including being banned from the international commercial trade. Since 2020, China has increased protection for the native Chinese pangolin, Menes pentadactyla, we'll say that's how I say it, to the highest level, which closed an important loophole for consumption of the species in country. Additionally, the government will no longer allow the use of pangolin scales in traditional medicine, a big win, given that an estimated 195,000 pangolins were trafficked in 2019 for their scales alone. China recently removed Guilonji, that's a word, a traditional medicine containing pangolin ingredients from its last pharmacopoeia. The Chinese pharmacopoeia is the official standard for clinical prescriptions, and the removal of Guilonji, sure, reflects the country's shift away from the use of wildlife in traditional medicine. Huge win there. Absolutely massive win. I get it. Traditional medicine goes deeply into a culture, but at some point, people must understand that there are beliefs that are 100% proven to be incorrect and are only harming the beautiful creatures that live on our planet. Now, unfortunately, these games were released in 2009-2010 when we would see the decline in their populations and see them in the Safari Zone, meaning that they predate the label of pangolins being vulnerable in 2013, depending on the pangolin. But that's not to say it wasn't unofficial during the years leading up to it. Plus, we do see the world of Pokemon developing and changing between generations, so while it may be unrelated by direct reference, it's still shown to be true from what we find in the games and could be related without the official pangolin restriction. You can't have a nature preserve without the giraffes, my favorite animal of all time, and as such, you can't have a safari zone without a Girafarig. It is seen in a number of locations, but at least when we get to Hoenn, we only see it in Mirage Mountain and the Safari Zone. Girafarig has adapted itself even to be incredibly alert, having its smaller head on its tail awake at all times as it doesn't need to sleep, allowing them to be active and aware of its surroundings at all times for any predators or other threats. It's wild to even consider that its evolution for Farigiraf can only be found in Area 0, Terra Raid battles, and in the Blueberry Academy biome. For whatever reason, they effectively had so many threats that they needed to stay alert so often, but their numbers were so low and they couldn't defend themselves assumedly enough to be able to evolve into Farigiraf. All while their numbers in Paldea are supported better thanks to West Province Areas 2 and 3, where we can find Girafarig. Both of these areas not quite being savannas, but at least close enough for their needs. And unfortunately, this is in strong reflection to giraffes in the real world. The following is from the International Fund for Animal Welfare. Are giraffes endangered? The answer to this question is complicated. There are approximately 117,000 giraffes left in the wild, and the IUCN Red List classifies the species as a whole as vulnerable. But the number of giraffes has plummeted dramatically over the past 3 decades, by up to 40%. Some people refer to this as a silent extinction, because the decline has been so slow that it's almost gone unnoticed. But luckily, conservationists are paying attention. At IFAW, they are committed to protecting giraffes and preventing further population declines through hands-on conservation efforts, community partnerships, and policy advocacy. In Africa, they partner with rangers to find and rescue injured or vulnerable giraffes. In 2023, they helped rangers get water to 12 Maasai giraffes that had been cut off from their water supply by farmers' fences. They've also contributed to policy changes benefiting these creatures. The factors disrupting giraffes' way of life include habitat loss, poaching, drought, human-wildlife conflict, and civil unrest. The IUCN Red List classifies the species as a whole as vulnerable. Though giraffes as a species are not considered endangered, some giraffe subspecies are. Out of 8 assessed subspecies, 2, the reticulated giraffe and the Maasai giraffe, are classified as endangered. Another 2, the Kordofan giraffe and the Nubian giraffe, are critically endangered. The Kordofan giraffe has lost 90% of its population since the 1980s, and the Nubian giraffe has lost 98%. Another incredibly important point is this. Placing something on the endangered list or at risk or near extinction or whatever else is just a way to punch the governments in the face to get their attention and then point at the problems. Because there are so many factors governments like to say, well, unless it fits this criteria, it isn't our problem because they're a bunch of nerds, which is horribly wrong for them to do. All because there are no categories in nature. And I know I'm about to rant, but stick with me. Because we call things herbivores or carnivores, but when push comes to shove and creatures have no choice, they will eat anything and everything. When we think we have a species figured out based on genetics and behavior, they like to switch it up on us and prove us wrong by mating with each other and creating a new creature that can't have children, but exists anyway. When we think we can categorize and rule over nature with laws and our own values, nature says that, and whales sink super yachts. We normalize wildfires and made up wildfire season. People plan to leave this planet and go to Mars, and instead of actually working to better the planet and do things like keep pollinators safe, people invent tools to pollinate flowers ourselves, and I hate it. Pokemon has strongly advocated for nature and harmony with it, making clear in the beginning of many of its first movies, within Alola as well, and so much more, that we are one with nature, that there is a whole world of beauty that exists, and all we have to do is go look for it. Go open our eyes, not be ignorant, and to do something. And it's something I see so often is how that idea is missed, or how people throw everything away for convenience. And it's all also because people like to claim nature is political, when in fact the majority of humans across the globe agree, in spite of their political stance, that nature should be protected. Yet we choose to take the routes of convenience. We choose to take the route of apathy, or choose to take self-pity towards an inability to do anything. What can I do? And it all makes me ashamed of the human race from time to time, and even ashamed of when I even do it, when I choose convenience. It's wrong. It's just so easy to do, and I hate it. But rant over. But just keep these things in mind as we enter the future. The less funding and attention, the worse things will get, as everything will become a silent extinction, as we have seen with the giraffes. Might have gone on the rant because I love my giraffes, and that hurts me a lot to, read about. And even one of them, even the subspecies going extinct, On a much lighter note, the strange painter beagle that is Smeargle is an anomaly. It doesn't fit into the ecosystem in ways that I can figure out. It doesn't follow an omnivorous diet as you would expect of canines, but it is highly social as we would expect of domesticated dogs. And despite it all, we find it in an incredibly low number of places other than the Safari Zone. We look at the ruins of Alph, Artisan Cave, some pokey radar events or swarms, one route in Kalos, one route in Alola, and with all these locations, they really aren't doing much. Even when we look at Artisan Cave, sure, they have the 100% encounter rate, but is it because they're just working on a project here? Or is this one of their major homes? It's honestly an incredibly confusing Pokemon. The closest tie I can make is that beagles apparently derive from the Roman Molossian hound, which is an extinct dog breed from ancient Greece, and how it bred with British scent hounds to create the beagle we know today. Or at least that's as far back as we currently know regarding their ancestry. This doesn't really give us much of a tie, and it's hard to tell population, so maybe stick this in the same category as Relicanth, where we really don't know much regarding population, and if we can even call it endangered. Jigglypuff's encounter locations seems to increase and then dramatically drop, starting with just Route 3, then expanding to include 6 different routes within the Kanto and Johto region, only to drop back down to 2 routes and the Safari Zone by Generation 4, Heart Gold, Soul Silver. To better explain from now on, if I say Gen 4, that does include Heart Gold, Soul Silver, let me save my breath. This increase and then sudden decrease in habitat and of course population can likely just be tied to Jigglypuff facing more predators in these areas as time went on. The only way that this Pokemon defends itself is by singing to its opponents, lulling them to sleep. It will continue to sing without stopping, even to the point of damaging its body, just to get them to sleep, because then it can safely run away. But if there are creatures that can resist its song, and a lot of them, then it, of course, is at more risk. They are a fairly docile species, they're literally the balloon Pokemon even, so it doesn't leave them with much room for survival. Another strange case is with Mr. Mime. You could only get it in a trade in the first generation, and then finally on Route 21 in Gen 2, but it continues to be a Pokemon that is hardly found in the wild whatsoever in most of the regions. 2 routes in Sinnoh, Reflection Cave in Kalos, an SOS in the city of Hau'oli, and then plenty of locations within Galar for its Galarian form. This is another one that I honestly don't know what to make of it. It is at least noted to be very rare, so once again, like I said towards the beginning of this video, this might be less of an endangered situation and more of this is just a hardly seen Pokemon situation, which we can always attribute to many others like our pseudo-legendary Pokemon, for example. Pokemon like the Dragonite line, the Larvitar line, or even non-pseudos like Clefable, are rare, but their populations don't seem to be in any level of decline. They're assumedly stable and living their lives in solitude, far away from the human eye. We can even extend this to a Pokemon like Lickitung or Snorlax, Pokemon that eat incredible amounts of food. A world even as magical as Pokemon's Earth can't sustain them if they had large populations, so they just typically aren't seen very often, but likely survive just fine, and as such aren't actually even endangered. Goldeen itself may not technically be endangered since we see it on so many routes, but since it does appear in the Safari Zone, and I have found this information in a past video, I can talk about one of its potential inspirations on how it almost went extinct, at least its real life version. Because it turns out that the Tosakin goldfish, the fish that Goldeen is inspired by, was considered extinct due to the devastation that followed World War II and then the Nankai earthquake in 1946, though by some miracle, 6 of them were found at a restaurant in Kochi Prefecture, which only had them as part of a trade for some Japanese spirits, some alcohol if you would. These Tosakin
have been registered as protected species within the Kochi Prefecture, though the unfortunate bit is that since all Tosakin originate from the 6 that were saved, they are all predisposed to genetic weaknesses as they are all too closely related to each other. Remember what I said earlier? Now, their numbers are pretty low compared to other goldfish, breeding is difficult, and they prefer new water as opposed to old water that other goldfish might prefer. Likely because they're primarily seen as bottom feeders despite being all level feeders. Instead of, eating at the bottom, they literally eat like everywhere. It's like, oh, there's food all over the place, let me eat that, instead of just, again, being, I don't know why I'm trying to explain it that way. Either way, again, Golding itself might not be endangered, but it is fun to talk about that tie to the real world. Alright, time to get sad and talk about another endangered species because we do have Rhyhorn and its relation to rhinos. Its population is secluded entirely to Victory Road and Johto, and is otherwise not found anywhere in the first 3 generations except within the Safari Zone, and then Cerulean Cave specifically in Pokemon Yellow only. In real life, there was a rhino in Japan called the Japanese greater one-horned rhino. While rhinos look fairly similar across the board, Rhyhorn seems to match the build of this lad pretty well. One of these rhinos were caught and transferred to Tamazu in 1958. It was named Tamao. A second rhino, being a female, was imported in 1961. And to bring this full circle, Kanto is based on the real Kanto region in Japan. Commercially oriented Celadon City and Saffron City are based on the sprawling city of Tokyo, the most important economic center of Japan, of course. And where is the Safari Zone? Not in Celadon or Saffron, unfortunately, but rather north of Fuchsia City. So that's as far as our comparison goes to try and match up their geological locations, if that's the right word to use, I always mess that up, but it's still a pretty cool connection all in all. At the very least, we can still see this as a strong tie despite the map differences, and as again, Rhyhorn is found almost exclusively within the Safari Zone and is well protected, we tie it to the protection of real-life rhinos. Their horns being seen as incredibly valuable, and once again used in traditional medicine, which, as I've ranted about in other videos, does absolutely nothing and is the exact same composition as our fingernails. Despite that, their population's driven down an incredible amount due to poaching. Yay! Protect the rhinos, protect Rhyhorn, stop making useless medicine, please. As if me saying that in this video means anything at all, because the people that are doing this aren't watching this, nor do they care about what I say. I'm just some random dude in a chair surrounded by cartoon creatures, but I know you care, and you're cool for that, so thanks. While Grimer and Muck are often given a bad rep for being living biohazards that destroy the environment, as the world was being cleaned up, people started realizing that their populations were lowering dramatically. Polluted lakes and streams were restored, trash and industrial waste were cleaned up, and these Pokemon's numbers were dropping fast. But instead of allowing the species to be wiped out, as their food sources were depleted and they faced extinction, as of Ultra Sun, sludge ponds have been built to prevent them from going completely extinct. But why? Well, Muck and many other poison Pokemon are born from our filth, but they are the culmination of that filth brought to life, a super condensed version of it in the cases of Muck especially, and even wheezing, technically. Sure, they might mix around their toxins, but they do run out eventually as they need to consume more. And at the very least, coughing are naturally occurring creatures through and through, thanks to them having populations at volcanoes. But if there was a cesspool of filth from other Pokemon, we might just expect to see Grimer at the very least, even in the natural world. Plus, they have become even more useful as they are turned into their Alolan forms, which specialize in helping get rid of human filth, and not the ones from our bowels, but rather chemical waste, anything unnatural, synthetic, anything along those lines. They're important as part of the ecosystem that we live in, just as many poisonous Pokemon are. But if you want a more in-depth version of poison Pokemon, then I have a whole toxic ecology video on this subject that you can check out. We're gonna have 2 Pokemon back-to-back that were nearly hunted to extinction by humanity, starting with Farfetch'd. Now, Farfetch'd is rarely seen, and thus it is thought that its numbers are decreasing, and that it is at risk of extinction. According to sources such as Pokemon the Series and the Pocket Monsters Encyclopedia, its population decline is caused by humans who hunted it down for food. One popular recipe suggested cooking it with its own leek. There have been attempts at breeding in order to increase the Farfetch'd population. Not only this, but there are some reports that the leeks that they like are struggling to grow in some areas of the world, removing their primary food supply and also being a major cause as to why their numbers are declining despite us turning a new leaf and trying to help them. The only tie that is more than just speculation is that Farfetch'd itself is a golden opportunity and a pun all in one, based on a phrase literally translated as "a duck comes bearing spring onions," as a phrase which derives from spring onions being associated as being delicious and accompaniment to duck. And of course, this phrase can be shortened to Kamonegi, which when you slam those two words together, you get Farfetch'd's letter-to-letter name, Kamonegi. So I guess it was too much of a golden opportunity to pass up, and everyone was blasting this Pokemon out of the sky like the Americans did to the passenger pigeon. Because Mudbray was hunted nearly to extinction when it lived all over the world, it was believed for a time to run wild only in Alola. Despite this, Mudbray have been seen roaming in Galar and Paldea, suggesting that its population is slowly recovering from near extinction. Galar and Paldea's inspirations would be known to have a long history of eating horse meat, but is something that has lowered in modern days to my understanding. A major reason why this happens is purely out of necessity. Every place in the world survives by doing what is necessary to them, and some places eat lots of guinea pig, for example. It's culture, and it is very interesting to me overall. Looking first at Galar, in such a harsh climate, and especially when the coldest days were upon them as they needed Pokemon to help them survive, they were eating plenty of horse meat in order to make it day to day. There's a lot of meat in them, the horses, after all. Meanwhile, in at least Spain, which is part of Paldea's inspiration of the Iberian Peninsula as a whole, horse meat, oh my god, I just said whole horse, JoJo's reference, was incredibly important during times of extreme hardship, such as after Civil War and World War II. Also, apparently the meat is super tender, and I'll be the first to admit it here, so, don't worry about it in the comments if you do too. I want to try it. They aren't endangered, as they are raised similarly to cows for this purpose, so I won't feel bad at all about it. I would eat anything that has strong and safe populations at least once. Except for pufferfish, apparently, because my fiance has banned me from it because I already eat a lot of things that she questions, and knowing my luck, pufferfish would be what takes me out. I've eaten raw chicken once before. I was eating it by accident a long time ago. I turned on the lights, saw it was raw. Yes, I did keep eating, only for a little bit longer. I did not get sick. It's okay. I have a super stomach, apparently. Now, you might also wonder why Mudbray wasn't pushed to extinction in Alola, and that's partially because they were incredibly necessary for settlements. Alola, just like Hawaii, does not have easily accessible clay, and both Mudbray and Mudsdale can chew up the soil and make it far more accessible, helping Alola then create things like homes, Golett, and Baltoy. At the end of the day, you don't eat something vital to your society. It's survival and it's culture. Unless it is literally meant to be eaten, like, I don't know, fish on Fridays, but that's a technicality and I'm just gonna move on. Tempe has an incredibly low number of places where it can be encountered, and often only in swarms. This little elephant is one that you likely expected from the start, considering the protections around elephants in the real world. There isn't much else that we see on Phanpy or its evolution Donphan regarding this, but with their species being kept safe in safari zones, it's kind of a no-brainer. Back to the World Wildlife Fund, elephants help maintain forests and savanna ecosystems for other species and are integrally tied to rich biodiversity. Elephants are important ecosystem engineers. They make pathways in dense forested habitats that allow passage for other animals. An elephant footprint can also enable a micro-ecosystem that, when filled with water, can provide a home for tadpoles and other organisms. As keystone species, they help maintain biodiversity of the ecosystems they inhabit. African elephant populations have fallen from an estimated 12 million a century ago to some 400,000. In recent years, at least 20,000 elephants have been killed in Africa each year for their tusks. African forest elephants have been the worst hit. Their populations declined by 62% between 2002 and 2011, and they have lost 30% of their geographical range, with African savanna elephants declining by 30% between 2007 and 2014. I want you to understand this, that despite them still having children, despite literally trying to breed and have babies, the elephant population hit that much of a decline. This dramatic decline has continued and even accelerated, with cumulative losses of up to 90% in some landscapes between 2011 and 2015. Today, the greatest threat to African elephants is wildlife crime, primarily poaching for the illegal ivory trade, while the greatest threat to Asian elephants is habitat loss. which results in human-elephant conflict. World Wildlife Fund has advocated for an end to commercial elephant ivory sales in the US and other major markets like China, Thailand, and Hong Kong as the most effective and efficient solution to end this illegal ivory trade. All I can think about genuinely is how elephants are one of my fiance's favorite animals and how much this would just break her heart. I'm going to tell her about it anyway. But at least as of 2018, China has also banned domestic trade of elephant ivory, and as a result, even black market interest has dropped. Which you would think the opposite would happen, you know, if you make something illegal like prohibition, then it spikes back up, but apparently not. And now it's a matter of continuing to stop the illegal ivory trade and help restore safe habitats for these beautiful pachyderms. The last Pokemon might surprise you, but it's Ditto. And I know, you might say it helps in Pokopia. Trust me, I know. I beat the game myself. You might say it can breed with nearly every Pokemon, and that's cool, I guess, but you can't breed more Ditto into existence. In fact, we don't even know where they come from. Sure, there's a lot of speculation, like it being a failed Mew clone, but that's been debunked for years, and even when we try to look at more details, we continue to come up short. They can't be bred to create more Ditto. They have never been noted to create more of themselves in any way. They just exist. And for all we know, while Ditto might live for an incredibly long time without a way to create more of themselves, they are perpetually stuck in a state of functional extinction. You'd hope that we'd find a way to understand them more, to know their origin, but we have nothing concrete and are left wondering and speculating if one day they'll just stop existing, which would be incredibly unfortunate to say the very least. But what are your thoughts? Did any of these entries shock you, or did I miss any? Let me know in the comments, as that's all for today. I've tried making this video 2 times before this, but could not find the inspiration or the strong tie, and now I've not only covered endangered Pokemon, but also safari zones to some capacity. Blueberry Academy, I will admit, is a little bit weird, and I'll get there at some point. It's kind of like a fully realized Aether Paradise in terms of conservation, and I'm going to need to dig deep into that one like I would with an Ecology of a Region video. If you enjoyed, subscribe for all the other hours of deep dives I have, share the video, hype it up, and leave a like if you'd want more videos like this, where honestly, I talked more about animals than Pokemon. These imaginary critters have been my teaching tool for over 2 years now, and it's been amazing. So thank you as well to the members who you see on the screen. If you want behind the scenes info, early access to videos, and members exclusive videos, become a member for as little as $3 a month. It makes a massive difference in supporting the channel, and you get plenty of extra content. Lastly, one of the best comments from last week is pretty fitting, as I read from Carl, who I chose just to represent the many comments that kindly informed me that one way that humans may have survived Pokopia, despite the many years of time past, is through time dilation during space travel. I couldn't quite figure out how it was possible and completely forgot time dilation could have been a thing, so who knows? Maybe it is true. But if you want more on Pokopia, I have a whole video on me explaining its lore, the extinction, or rather the lack of it, so on and so forth, everything that you can imagine solving it that you can watch after this. But with that then, as always, don't do anything I wouldn't do, don't do anything I would do, please be nice to each other, I love you, and I'll see you next time.